So, Paul,
Yeah.
by all accounts, Beethoven died in 1827, and you have him in Boston in the 1830s, I think it is. Where do you get the chutzpah to do that kind of thing?
He died too young. He was only 56. And why shouldn't he have had a few more years? But the fact was, I mean, it all sprang from a true fact that in 1823, Beethoven received a commission from one of the most senior musical societies in North America, the Handel and Haydn Society of Boston, a commission to write an oratorio in English for them to perform there in Boston. And he didn't say no, but he was writing his late string quartets and he didn't get around to it. So I thought if he has another 6 years of life, enough time to write some other things and get round to this oratorio. And of course, he would have wanted to go to Boston to be there for the performance. So I thought, let's let him do this.
It's amazing how you pull it off. I mean, when I've told people about the book, the first instinct that almost everyone has is skepticism, that they can't believe it would be believable or that you could make it come alive, but you absolutely do. It's amazing. How did you do that? How did you? I mean, it's obviously an act of imagination, but it also must be a lot of research, I assume. I mean, you must have really had to look to the history books.
Well, not so much the history books as the online stuff. And this would have been completely impossible 20 years ago, completely impossible.
Why?
Even 10 years ago, it would have been very, very difficult. But there's now so much material online. I mean, I can go online and I can see the passenger list for ships traveling from ports in Europe to New York or to Boston or wherever. I can see whoever was the immigration officer or whoever, his handwriting, her handwriting, probably his, and giving the ages and the names and the trades of these people. So I thought, where would Beethoven naturally tend to travel from? He probably wouldn't have traveled from Britain because that's such a long way from Vienna. So I have him traveling to Amsterdam, and there were stagecoaches. He could have got to Amsterdam from Vienna in 5 or 6 days. And then I looked at ships traveling from Amsterdam to Boston until I found one that just seemed suitable.
Why do you think he would have wanted to go to make the effort to come to America? Why do you think he would have wanted to do that?
Well, in terms of, I mean, it would have been a great pity in terms of the book if he hadn't. He has to do that. I mean, that has to be part of the story. But Haydn was in fact invited to go to North America. I can't remember whether it was Boston or New York. It began to seem, no great composer actually did it for quite a while yet. I think Tchaikovsky and Saint-Saëns were kind of the first when Carnegie Hall opened. But it was something that people were thinking could be possible. And so let's do it. Let's have him go there and be in a completely different culture and have some things which he couldn't have in Vienna, including a warm relationship with a woman who is his equal in age, roughly, and his social equal.
I thought you did an amazing job of drawing her character, because she has to be a really appealing person for it to be believed that Beethoven would care about her at all. And you do that. I mean, you do make her intelligent and witty and sharp and warm and kind and all of the things that would be needed to make Beethoven respond. I think it's quite an achievement. I think that character of that woman. Also, the young girl who does the sign language, of course, named Thankful, incredible, wonderful name. Um, Tell me about sign language and how she could have conveyed the meaning of these signs to him so quickly.
Well, thank you, Rick, for all of that. And yeah, let's talk about both those characters. But the sign language, this was going to be a problem for the book. How is Beethoven going to communicate? He not only doesn't know English, by this point in his life, he is almost totally deaf. I mean, he was almost totally deaf by the time he died. So if we assume the thing is progressive, then he really cannot communicate, but he can't hear people speak. So my first thought was, well, maybe medicine in 1833 is a little bit more advanced in Boston than it was in Vienna, and maybe a doctor can find some way of curing him. But the more you research Beethoven's hearing problem, it's not just the ear, it's the brain-ear interface. So it didn't seem very likely that that was a way. And I was talking about this problem to my son who was living in Peru, and we were driving through Peru, and I was talking about the book, and he said, how far is Martha's Vineyard from Boston? And I said, well, it is just around the corner. And he said, well, I think there was a deaf and dumb sign language on Martha's Vineyard. And I researched this a little bit. Somebody sent me a book, and indeed there was, because on Martha's Vineyard at this time in the first half of the 19th century, 10% of people were totally deaf, congenitally deaf. I mean, they'd never heard. And so you're almost certain to have somebody in your family circle, a friend. And so everybody on the island learnt deaf and dumb sign language.
Why were so many people deaf? Do they know why?
Yeah, there was one chap from Kent who went there in 1637 or something and spread the gene.
Wow.
So it was very common, and also it's very useful to them. You know, if visitors came to the island, they had a kind of private language that they could use. It's a bit like Welsh here. If Welsh people don't want you to understand, they just start talking Welsh. Well, on Martha's Vineyard, they could just start using their sign language. So I had the idea of a young girl, I imagine about 15, going from Martha's Vineyard to be Beethoven's helpmeet in this way. And she doesn't have to know German, of course. She can hear what somebody's saying, sign it to Beethoven, and Beethoven can speak, can sign back, and she can convey what he's saying.
How did she teach him the sign language? I mean,
well, I mean, I think this would have taken a time. I kind of have it happening in weeks, which is probably a bit optimistic. But that's the way they get about. And as for what Beethoven says, I thought I can't invent speech for Beethoven, for heaven's sake. So everything Beethoven says is quoted from his letters, from published English translations of his letters. So it was a question of finding things that he had actually written down as translated into English, and that's everything he said.
That's from the notebooks that he kept for conversation books. Those books
from his letters. Because the conversation books still haven't been much translated into English.
And you know, tell me about there's a point at which you publish a page of music in the book that's from the Oratorio, right?
Yeah.
Did you compose that, or did Beethoven compose that, or what?
That is, again, a late Beethoven, 1820, I think. That's actually taken from one of the conversation books. It is this little melody. I thought there had to be something. You know, the book is about the composition of this oratorio, and I have kind of modern day musicologists talking about the oratorio, and then I have to describe the performance myself and say what this music is like.
Yeah.
I thought there has to be something, some scrap, and there it is. As it turned out, that there's a very good reason why we don't have the score of this. I mean, one reason why we don't have the score of this oratorio is it was never written. but there's also a reason within the fiction that the publisher in Boston, their warehouse burnt down in 1833. So if we assume that after the performance, all the musical material, all the string parts and all the choral scores go back to the publisher and they're lost, and all that survives is this song that Beethoven in the book wrote for a boy to sing. But can we go back to Hannah Hill?
Yeah.
The other big female character, the other character I had to kind of invent. Thankful is totally made. Thankful was a name that was in use on Martha's Vineyard, and I like the name Thankful.
Yeah.
But Hannah Hill is a real person.
Ah.
We don't know very much about her. But Beethoven always in the summer would go out of Vienna and stay in some small town outside, away from the city's heat in the summer. So I think he would have wanted to do that in Boston as well. And he is invited out by Josiah Quincy, who was mayor of Boston at some point and president of Harvard, a big Boston worthy, out to his country estate in Quincy, which is now a suburb of Boston. But at that time, it was just the largest estate, which had Quincy's house on it. So Beethoven goes there. And a cousin of Josiah Quincy is Hannah Hill. And I rather like the sound of her. She's a little bit older than Beethoven. I think she's sort of 75 and he's by now 63. And she'd been married, and she'd been married to somebody who seems to have been, he did a bit of this and he did a bit of that. It wasn't a, let's marry somebody who's going to be successful. She seems to have loved this husband, even though he didn't, he moved from being a doctor to being a postmaster, all sorts of things. So I thought this is the kind of person that Beethoven ought to have this close. I mean, there's nothing physical, but have this close friendship with. And it turns out that she is the person who can give him the help he needs with the oratorio. The real help he needs is to get a good text. And so she.
How did you come up with that text? Because I mean, you really do show us the first text and then the much better text. Did you write all of that yourself?
Yeah.
Wow, it's very impressive.
I kind of wanted to bring in as many people that Beethoven might have met as I could. So we have Herman Melville is there, and Longfellow is talked about. People who were about in the Boston area, or could have been about in the Boston area in 1833, they come in, and somebody who comes in as a little girl of 3 who actually hears the performance is Emily Dickinson. And I kind of imagined Hannah Hill as a sort of foreshadowing of Emily Dickinson. What might have been possible for somebody with that startling originality a couple of generations earlier.
Do you have a section of the novel that you could read to us, maybe that has Hannah Hill in it or something?
Oh, well, yeah, exactly. I will do this. This is Beethoven and Hannah meet each other at dinner in the Quincy's house, and she says things that lead him to understand her intelligence and her musical awareness. And so he invites her to go around, and Thankful and Beethoven have a little cottage by the house, and he invites Hannah to go and visit him the next morning. It would not have taken Mrs. Hill very long to observe the mass of papers and the composer, perhaps still with pen in hand, as he got up from his chair. "My dear sir," she would have to say, "I fear my arrival is inopportune. You are evidently in the ecstasy of composition. I should never have come. Indeed, I should never have come." From watching Thankful's hands, the composer slowly turned his head to look at Mrs. Hill with sadness in his eyes. "Am I not your true friend?" he said. "It does me good to revive the old feelings of friendship." Then he clapped his hands and added, "Now no more, my dear sweet friend." Knowing that the composer was inclined to forget the courtesies, Thankful motioned to Mrs. Hill to take a seat. She herself remained standing, as was her custom. "Meanwhile," the composer began again, "I have been composing a good deal." "That is very good to hear," said Mrs. Hill. Then, entirely to her surprise, the composer beckoned her to pull up her chair alongside his, at the same time catching Thankful's eye and signing, "Please have the chocolate prepared." While Thankful was out of the room, the composer cleared space on the desk and brought a pile of folios, his fair copy, to the fore. "You will probably be able to read my manuscript," he said. Mrs. Hill almost certainly realized at once it would have been rare for him to take anyone into his creative confidence, especially where a major work in progress was concerned. But she may not have realized quite how rare. She would have suspected immediately, too immediately to be astonished, that she was to be introduced to the Boston Oratorio. And it would not have taken her long to recognize that this was so, and even to form in her mind some impression of a choir and orchestra in severe flood. The music was plunging and rearing up through shadows like a ship on a strong sea in a thunderstorm, but all a little in slow motion. She nodded to the composer to reveal the next page. At Thankful's return, she was able to speak, and hardly knowing what to say first, came out with, "This treatment of the submediant is extraordinarily powerful." There you go. They're off.
Wonderful. I'm tempted to ask you when about the what happens next in Beethoven's life after your novel ends. I mean, what would you imagine the rest of his life would have been like?
Well, the novel begins with a sea journey. He's on this brig, which I managed to identify from looking at all the records in the National Archives. And so it ends with him going back. It ends with Thankful and the gentlemen of the Handel and Haydn Society on the quayside.
Having said goodbye to Hannah Hill.
Having said goodbye, and off he goes back to Europe.
And so do you think he would have gone back to Vienna?
He would have gotten back to Vienna. I have no idea what he writes after the book is over. I don't know. I know what he's written up to the Oratorio, but that's as much as I know. And I mean, I obviously have him having written another symphony. He's written a clarinet quintet. He's written all sorts of piano pieces. He's into his fourth period by now.
It's an astonishing book. I'm so impressed, and I love the book. It's been published in the UK, and it will be published sometime soon in the United States, right?
It will indeed. Yeah, thanks to you. It's going to. I'm really pleased about this. It's going to come out with New York Review Books in the spring. Hopefully. Sorry?
Have they said when yet? When the book will come out?
In the spring, next spring. I mean, it was planned. I mean, I wrote it without any idea of 2020 being a Beethoven year.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I didn't think about that. And it's turned out, of course, because of the coronavirus, to be a very strange Beethoven year with all these concerts being cancelled.
Yeah.
But it was brought out in this country to celebrate 2020 Beethoven 250th anniversary. But I'm way glad that it's going to be brought out in the States in 2021, and all that carnival will be over, and it will.
One hopes.
Will have to fly on its own merits.
Yeah. Well, and also we hope the pandemic will be over, and you can come over and be here with us in person.
Yeah.
Do you miss New York?
Oh, certainly. I mean, this is the longest time I haven't been in New York since the late 80s or something.
You lived here for a good decade, I think, right? At least.
Well, I was backwards and forwards because of having family over on this side. So there was a period of nearly a decade when I was working for the New Yorker and then for the New York Times, and going backwards. And 1 year I did the return trip 20 times, which I
Wow.
don't particularly recommend, but it's okay maybe when you're in your 40s, but.
And now
Well,
you're living,
it's the way politicians and musicians
yeah,
and a lot of people work.
yeah. Now you're living in rural Wales, is that right?
Yeah, coastal Wales. I could move the machine around and show you the Atlantic
Oh, it
Ocean.
must be beautiful.
It is. It's wildly windy at the moment, which is very unusual for us in the middle of the
Hmm.
summer. But it's all kinds of things are possible here. Sometimes the rain is salt because of coming straight off the sea, over the sea.
Well, it's lovely talking to you, and I
Good to talk
congratulate
to
you on
you.
the book. It's a
So,
fantastic book, and
well, thank you.
there's my copy. Um,
There's your
I
copy.
don't know what the New York Review of Books will look like, but um,
I'm sure it'll be lovely. I mean, I love the design that they have.
oh yeah, great.
Yeah.
You've seen it already.
No, I mean in general,
Oh, in general, yes,
they're
yes, of
such
course. Yeah,
elegant
I'm
books.
sure they'll do a good job with it. Well, thank you for joining us for this, Paul. I really appreciate it, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.